Segment 1. Smoke pretty much anywhere. In 80s London, the air had a permanent haze. You'd step onto the tube, someone would already be flicking ash into a built-in tray. Pubs, offices, even hospital corridors, smoke everywhere. It wasn't rude, it was just life. People smoked while queuing for the bank, while cutting someone's hair, while pushing a pram down Oxford Street. Teachers lit up in staff rooms between lessons. Doctors had a cigarette on the walk between wards. Even planes had smoking sections, which, if you think about it, meant the whole plane. Ashtrays filled with the smell of gold leaf and Benson and Hedges, and yellow nicotine stains painted every ceiling from Hackney cafes to Soho bars. If you forgot your lighter, someone within reach always had one. No one complained about second-hand smoke, the phrase barely existed. By the time the 2007 smoking ban arrived, London had already changed. The fog lifted, literally. But for a long stretch, the city itself seemed to exhale right along with everyone in it. Segment 2. Jump on or off a moving Routemaster bus. Most people remember the Routemaster for its look, that red, boxy silhouette crawling through traffic, but what really defined it was the freedom built into its design. The open platform at the back wasn't decoration, it was an invitation. Anyone could leap on while it slowed at a light or step off just before the next stop. Conductors moved through the aisles taking fares, calling people love or mate, and never seemed especially bothered by who came or went. Some say it carried 90 passengers, but it always felt like more, a constant churn of bodies and chatter. That rear platform became part of London's rhythm, like jaywalking with purpose or cutting across a queue without malice. Every city has its own unwritten rules, and that was one of ours. One driver claimed pigeons used to hitch rides on the back during winter, clinging to the metal rail for warmth. Hard to prove, but easy to believe. You could, after all, ride the city like it was alive. Segment 3. Stay drinking after hours in a lock-in. Lock-ins weren't a secret, they were an open secret. Technically illegal, yes, but treated like a harmless glitch in the system. Once the doors were locked, the lights dimmed slightly, and a kind of hush settled over the place. Curtains pulled across the windows, till drawers shut, clocks ignored. The pints kept coming, cash exchanged quietly, and every regular knew the rhythm. It wasn't rebellion, it was maintenance. Londoners working late shifts, musicians packing up, cabbies stopping by before heading home, all of them needed somewhere that didn't shut on schedule. The trick was keeping it low-key. No loud music, no shouting near the door, and definitely no new faces who couldn't keep their mouths shut. Police rarely made an issue of it unless the pub had drawn attention before. Oddly enough, those hours after closing built stronger communities than anything officially sanctioned. It said something about the city, that real belonging tended to happen after the paperwork stopped counting. Segment 4. Drive home after just a couple. How many people actually thought just a couple's meant two? Everyone said it, just a couple and I'll head off, then it became 3, maybe 4, then someone got another round. The roads were emptier back then, headlights cutting through a quieter city, and most drivers figured a pint or two didn't count as real drinking. The laws were there, sure, but the culture leaned on trust. You judged yourself by feel, not by numbers on a machine. Cars weren't sterile machines yet. They rattled, smelled faintly of petrol and cigarette smoke, and you could still hear the engines hum under your own thoughts. Radios played scratchy top 40 and every steering wheel had that slight looseness that made you hold it tighter. There's a story about one London cabbie who kept a breathalyzer keyring for show, said it was a conversation piece. He never used it. Most people didn't. They just drove carefully, and swore they were fine. Segment 5. Buy or sell knockoff tapes and banned tees at markets. A counterfeit t-shirt wasn't scandalous in the 80s, it was practical. Markets like Camden, Portobello, and Shepherd's Bush were full of them, hung from wire racks or folded on tarps that flapped when the wind picked up. The prints were almost right, tour dates that never happened, logos slightly off-scent, sleeves that shrank after one wash. Buyers didn't care. It was cheaper than the real thing, and it told people what you listened to. Cassettes worked the same way. Rows of plastic cases with crooked photocopied covers, Bowie, The Clash, Dire Straits, sometimes the wrong music inside altogether. Sellers claimed everything came from a mate at the label, which was code for a twin-deck tape recorder in a bedsit somewhere. Every now and then, the police made a show of confiscating a few boxes, though most days they walked straight past. The whole scene ran on a mutual understanding. Authenticity was expensive, but enthusiasm was free, and nobody wanted to kill that trade. Segment 6. Feed pigeons in Trafalgar Square. Feeding pigeons in Trafalgar Square used to be an industry. Not a pastime, an industry. Around 40,000 birds gathered there by the 1980s, and licensed vendors sold paper bags of seed for a few pence each. Tourists queued for photos, arms outstretched, heads covered, birds clambering over them like moving fabric. The square stone was permanently dusted white, and the fountains clogged regularly with feathers and seed husks. The council tried everything: fake hawks, bans on feeding, even bird birth control, but the sellers always came back, often the same families who'd worked those corners for decades. One vendor reportedly sold over 200 bags a day in peak season. The ban finally came in 2003, pushed through by Ken Livingstone, who called pigeons rats with wings. Most Londoners didn't argue. Still, something about it felt too neat, like scrubbing history until it gleamed. The square might be cleaner now, but it's quieter too, and that's not necessarily progress. Segment 7. Go squatting in an empty house. It wasn't really trespassing, that was the strange part. Squatting was legal, or at least tolerated, if the property was empty and you didn't break in. London in the 80s had thousands of abandoned terraces, old council flats waiting for demolition, and half-renovated Georgian houses left to rot. A group could move in, change the locks, and that was that. Police might knock, but unless the owner got a court order, you were safe for months, sometimes years. Whole streets in Brixton, Camden, and Hackney filled up like that: musicians, artists, people who'd fallen out with landlords or just couldn't pay rent. Some places had electricity spliced from the mains, others ran on candles and gas cookers. It looked chaotic from the outside but ran on its own kind of order. It's easy to frame it as rebellion, but it was also necessity. London's housing market hadn't yet hardened into myth. For a while, you could still carve out a home with nothing more than nerve and a screwdriver. Segment 8. Walk freely down Downing Street or right up to Buckingham Palace gates. You can't just stroll down Downing Street anymore. It's fenced off, guarded, sealed like a museum piece. Back in the 80s, though, people walked straight through. Office workers cut across as a shortcut. Tourists snapped photos by the black door. Kids on field trips stood right outside number 10 as if they were queuing for a bus. The gates only went up in 1989, officially because of security concerns, though the timing had as much to do with politics as safety. Before that, the idea of closing it seemed absurd. Police officers stood by, but they were conversational, not confrontational. Buckingham Palace was the same: crowds pressed right up to the railings, shaking hands with guards who mostly pretended not to laugh. It was informal, almost cheeky, a kind of British openness that didn't last. Some say it's progress, that it's safer this way. Maybe. But there's something off about a democracy that hides its front door. Segment 9. Throw a rave in an empty warehouse. It started legal, or at least, not explicitly illegal. By the mid-80s, warehouse raves were more logistics problem than crime. Someone found a space, disused factories in Hackney Wick, old print works near King's Cross, then word spread through flyers coded just enough to sound innocent. The music arrived first: acid house, Detroit techno, whatever was coming off pirate radio that week. Sound systems were hauled in on borrowed vans, lights wired up to car batteries, and by midnight the place was alive. The police didn't quite know what to do. Noise complaints, sure, but the gatherings were too fast, too fluid. When they shut one down, two more popped up. The Criminal Justice Bill of 1994, the one that banned gatherings with repetitive beats, didn't come from nowhere. It was London trying to regain control. Someone once claimed one of the earliest raves used leftover Cold War bunkers for the acoustics. Sounds exaggerated, but maybe not. The city always found strange ways to repurpose its ruins. Segment 10. Play loud music in the park without a permit. Technically, it's illegal now. You can't just set up a speaker and blast music in a park without a council permit. Yet in the 80s, nobody thought twice. People dragged out battered boomboxes, sometimes full sound systems powered by car batteries, and took over patches of grass in Hyde Park or Clissold. Sunday afternoons turned into informal parties: reggae one corner, synth pop another, kids running between picnic blankets as bass lines bled together. The rulebook existed, but enforcement didn't. It started to shift when councils began tightening noise bylaws in the late 80s. Some blamed complaints from nearby flats, others said it was about crowd control. Either way, the shift was gradual. One weekend the park warden would nod along, the next he'd be holding a clipboard and measuring decibels. There's an old story that one of the early pirate radio crews tested their signal from a park bench, broadcasting halfway across Hackney. Maybe true, maybe myth, but it fits the energy. Public space still felt public then. Segment 11, sell cigarettes or booze after hours from the corner shop. Everyone knew which shops did it. The metal shutter half down, lights dimmed, door cracked open just enough for a quiet exchange. Technically closed, but if you knocked and asked right, you'd leave with a pack of Embassy or a can of special brew. Prices were higher, inconvenience tax, as one shopkeeper joked, but no one complained. It kept the night going. The law said alcohol sales stopped at 11 p.m., but enforcement was spotty. Some councils turned a blind eye, others ran surprise checks. In parts of East London, it wasn't even subtle, a handwritten sign reading late sales by arrangement. The trick was keeping it quiet enough to seem respectable, loud enough for regulars to know. There's a story that a few shop owners used fridges wired to doorbells, buzzing when opened after hours so staff could hide stock before inspectors came through. Probably exaggerated, but it fits the energy, everyone pretending not to notice a rule everyone knew was being bent. Segment 12, swim in the Thames or Hampstead ponds freely. It's a bit like how people talk about wild swimming now, all romanticized, all carefully filtered through nostalgia, except back then, it wasn't a trend. It was just what people did. The Thames wasn't clean, not really, but it wasn't policed either. Kids jumped from embankments near Richmond, teenagers waded in after gigs at Hammersmith, and no one asked permission. By the early 80s, though, water quality had dipped low enough that signs started appearing, danger, no bathing. They weren't strictly enforced at first. That came later, when the health boards got involved. Hampstead ponds were the same story in miniature, half civic amenity, half anarchic ritual. You'd have poets and punks swimming alongside pensioners. Someone brought a radio once, and it fell in, people still swam around it for an hour before pulling the plug. It's odd how the ban made it cooler. Once something's illegal, it stops being leisure and becomes rebellion, even if it's just cold, muddy water. Segment 13, set off fireworks in the street on bonfire night. People still do it, no matter how many warnings go out. Every November, the streets fill with smoke and stray sparks, and someone's always lighting rockets from a milk bottle wedged between two paving slabs. It's technically legal, for a few days, but only if you follow a maze of time limits and safety distance rules nobody really enforces. What changed was scale. Back in the 70s, fireworks were smaller, simpler. A Catherine wheel nailed to a fence, a few fountains, maybe a rogue banger. Then came the supermarket packs, multi-shots, aerial bursts, stuff that used to be professional grade. Suddenly everyone's front garden was a launch pad. Critics call it dangerous chaos, but there's a strange precision to it. The timing, the angle, the unspoken coordination between houses on the same street. Some even use traffic cones as launch supports, absurdly effective, apparently. And when it all goes off at once, it's less a display than a conversation made of light and noise. Segment 14, ride in a car without a seatbelt. People always say no one wore seatbelts because they didn't care about safety, but that's not quite true. It was more that they didn't see the point. Cars in the 70s and early 80s felt solid, heavy doors, metal dashboards, no plastic anywhere, and that gave people a false sense of security. You'd slide into a cracked vinyl seat, light a cigarette, and the idea of strapping yourself in like an airline passenger seemed unnecessary, almost insulting. The first seatbelt laws came in 1983, though enforcement was slow. Some drivers kept them tucked behind the seat to stop the warning buzzers. Others looped them through their jackets so it looked like compliance from the outside. The police usually didn't care unless you were speeding. Here's the thing, people talk about it like pure recklessness, but it wasn't always that. It was pride, familiarity, and a touch of denial. Safety meant admitting cars could kill you, and no one wanted to think about that. Segment 15, drink in public spaces like parks or the tube. It was a bit like picnicking, but less organized, more spontaneous, more British in that half-embarrassed, half-defiant way. Drinking in parks was never really about the alcohol. It was about the setting: warm cans of lager, people sitting cross-legged on damp grass, someone passing around a portable radio. You weren't breaking the law so much as testing where it began. Police would walk past, nod, and only step in if the music got too loud or someone tried to light a disposable barbecue. Then came the city bans, Westminster first, then a slow spread across boroughs, but enforcement was selective. Hyde Park on a sunny Saturday was untouchable, a bus stop at midnight wasn't. And the tube was its own world entirely. People cracked cans between stations, hid bottles in paper bags, treated late-night trains like rolling pugs until the official ban in 2008. The strange thing is, public drinking made people social in ways pubs couldn't. Now, it just feels like something we weren't meant to outgrow.